Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some stories that are pretty baffling, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Stories about people who almost vanished.
Right.
And we've got two first-hand accounts that we're going to look at today.
Okay.
And they come from very different times and places.
Interesting.
But there is one chilling common thread in both.
What's that?
And that is that both these people felt that something was trying to take them.
Oh, wow.
And only a sudden interruption in both cases seemed to prevent them from disappearing.
It's so fascinating to me how these accounts, even when they're separated by like decades, still have that same feeling of some outside force that's like messing with reality.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy to think about.
Yeah.
Our first story takes place in the Black Forest in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Imagine it's the fall of 1968.
Right.
You're a lone hunter.
Okay.
And you've been tracking game all day long, but no luck.
Right.
You're starting to get a little frustrated.
Yeah, I can imagine.
This idea of isolation in nature comes up time and time again.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like you're stepping outside the familiar.
Right.
And then suddenly you become more susceptible to these unusual things.
Right, like you're more vulnerable somehow.
Exactly.
This hunter that we're talking about
Yeah.
describes this really sudden and unsettling shift in his environment.
Okay.
He says that sounds become muffled and his vision blurs beyond a certain distance.
So we can't see far away.
He can't see far away.
Yeah.
It's like he's describing this transparent wall that has suddenly appeared.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then he even feels like he's moving in slow motion.
But he knows he isn't.
But he knows he isn't.
Wow.
That's really weird.
That's so strange. Those sensory distortions, it's not just like a visual hallucination. It's like a warping of all his senses.
Yeah.
Almost like some deeper disruption is happening to his perception.
Yeah, like something's not right.
Yeah.
He starts to feel overwhelmed with fear and just this urge to escape this strange bubble.
Yeah.
So he pushes through the wall and instantly everything snaps back to normal.
Really?
The sounds of the forest are back.
Wow.
His vision is clear.
That's wild.
He can move normally.
It's almost like that sudden return to normal is just as unsettling as the experience itself.
Totally.
Like, how do you know what was real and what wasn't?
Right.
You know?
It makes you question everything.
It does. And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
So there are these local Native American legends
Okay.
about portals that exist within the Black Forest.
Portals.
Yeah, gateways to other worlds, they say. And in these other worlds, time moves differently.
Oh, wow. So we have this modern day experience that we're talking about.
Right.
But it's like layered on top of centuries old tales
Yeah.
that suggest that something strange has always been going on in this forest.
It's a chilling connection for sure.
It really is.
And it makes you wonder if these legends are actually based on real encounters.
With the unexplained.
The unexplained, exactly.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it really makes you think, like, how do we actually reconcile these stories
Right.
with how we think the world works,
Yeah, you mentioned researchers.
Yeah.
Have there ever been any scientific attempts to actually study these experiences, these almost vanished experiences?
Yeah, there is this growing field of study, and it's often called anomalous experiences research.
Okay.
And they basically examine these types of events.
Okay, so is it like a specific field?
Well, it kind of takes a multidisciplinary approach, so it draws on psychology and neuroscience and even physics
Wow.
to try and understand what might be going on.
So are there any theories out there that stand out as particularly promising?
Well, one area of research that I think is really intriguing is the one that focuses on how the brain can basically create its own reality,
Okay.
especially when it's under a lot of stress or in isolation. They've done sensory deprivation experiments,
Yeah. And they show that the brain can just conjure up these vivid hallucinations when it's not getting any external stimuli.
That's wild. So you're saying that could potentially explain what happened to that hunter in the Black Forest?
It's possible. He was alone deep in the woods. Maybe his mind just started to play tricks on him.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then what about the woman in Glacier National Park?
Right.
She wasn't alone.
Exactly. And her boyfriend actually corroborated some of the details, like the vibrations.
That's true. And she described those really specific physical sensations, like the burning in her feet.
Exactly.
And that suggests that there's something more going on than just like a mental thing, right?
Yeah, that's where it gets even more complicated. Some researchers are looking into whether these experiences could be linked to like electromagnetic fields or infrasound or some other natural phenomena that we don't really understand yet.
So you're saying that there's a possibility that these incidents are triggered by something in the environment?
Right, something that messes with our senses and how we perceive the world. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And there are documented cases of infrasound, right?
Yes.
Which is like sound that's below the range of human hearing.
Right.
And that can cause like hallucinations and feelings of unease and even physical sensations like vibrations.
Exactly.
So maybe that's what the woman in Glacier National Park experienced. Maybe there was some natural source of infrasound near the river.
It's definitely a possibility, but the problem is these experiences are so unpredictable and they don't happen very often.
Yeah.
It makes it really hard to study them in a controlled setting.
Right. It's like you said earlier, it's like trying to catch lightning in a bottle.
Exactly.
These events just happen spontaneously and then they're gone, and people are left wondering if it even really happened.
Right. And that brings us back to that question of subjective experience.
Yeah, like how much of this is psychology?
Exactly.
And how much of it is pointing to something we just don't understand yet?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating dilemma. On one hand, we have these incredible illusions that our brains can create. But on the other hand, we have these consistent details and these themes that come up again and again in these stories from all over the world.
And don't forget about the cultural aspect. Like we saw with that Black Forest story.
Right.
These experiences often line up with local folklore and legends.
Right, like the stories were there first.
Exactly. It's almost as if these stories that have been passed down for generations could actually be based on real encounters with the unexplained.
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to make sense of all of this? Like, do we just accept that there are things out there that we just can't explain? Or do we keep searching for answers?
Well, I think the best way to approach this is to embrace both.
Okay.
We need to be realistic about what we know and what we don't know.
Okay.
But we also need to be open to the possibility that there's more out there than we currently understand.
So it's about finding that balance between being skeptical, but also being open-minded.
Exactly. We don't want to just jump to conclusions or dismiss these experiences as just fantasy. But at the same time, we have to use critical thinking and try to apply scientific rigor to these stories to really understand them.
And that's where this anomalous experiences research comes in.
Right.
It's trying to bridge that gap between subjective experience and objective truth.
Exactly.
And to find a way to study these things that are so hard to pin down.
Yeah. And as we learn more, maybe we'll start to unlock some of these secrets that have been hidden for so long.
It's like we're standing on the edge of this vast unexplored territory, right?
It really is.
We have these glimpses of what might be out there, but we can't see the whole picture yet.
And I think that's what makes these stories so compelling.
Yeah.
They challenge us to broaden our understanding of what's real and to confront these big unknowns.
It's like a reminder that even with all our scientific advancements, there are still things happening in the universe that we just don't get.
And forces that can turn even an ordinary day into something extraordinary.
Yeah, it's like these almost vanished experiences
Yeah.
are like a wake-up call,
Yeah. Yeah.
to remind us that we don't actually have all the answers.
I think that's a really good way to put it. They make us rethink what we think we know, and they force us to confront just how much we don't know.
So for our listeners out there who are maybe a little freaked out right now
Yeah.
and are looking over their shoulder every time they're out hiking in the woods, what advice can you offer?
Well, I think first of all, it's really important to remember that statistically speaking, these experiences are really, really rare.
Okay.
Like, you're much more likely to see a deer or a squirrel when you're out on a hike than to have one of these weird encounters, you know?
That makes me feel a little better, but I mean, I gotta say, I'm still a little uneasy after hearing all these stories.
I get it, but I think the most important thing is to try and approach these mysteries with like a sense of curiosity instead of fear, you know?
Yeah.
So instead of being worried about getting abducted by some unknown force, maybe try to focus on the wonder and the awe that these experiences evoke.
So you're saying we should shift our perspective from what if something bad happens
Right.
to what if I'm witnessing something amazing?
Exactly. These experiences can be unsettling,
Yeah.
but they can also be super meaningful. They can make us question what we think is real and connect us back to these ancient traditions and beliefs.
Right.
And they can remind us of just how vast and mysterious the universe really is.
It's like they remind us that there's still magic in the world,
Yeah,
even if we don't really understand it.
exactly.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these almost vanished experiences,
Right.
what's the main thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
Well, I hope that they come away from this with a sense of wonder,
Okay.
a new appreciation for all the mysteries out there,
Yeah,
and maybe just a little more curiosity about the world that's beyond what we can see and hear every day.
I think that's a perfect way to end this.
Good.
A little bit of wonder, a little
Yeah.
bit of curiosity, and a lot of respect for the unknown.
Yeah.
And hey, who knows? Maybe one day science will be able to explain all of this.
You never know.
But until then, the mystery lives on.
And that's kind of what makes it so great, right?
It really is. Thanks for joining us, everyone, on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another exploration into all the weird and wonderful things that this world throws at us.